Prometheus is the flagship of the Weyland fleet. Weyland, the character who's our chairman of the board of the corporation, it's his ship. And on his ship, we decided it was going to be state-of-the-art with every conceivable facility, including a penthouse suite with cutting-edge medical facility, communication systems, scanning systems, infinite capacity for entering hostile planetary climates.
Good production design is so heavily driven by the basic volumes of the spaces and the needs of what the camera's going to do and the functional aspects of the storytelling, that Arthur was able to give us all the guidance we needed for all those things. And that last little bit of, kind of icing filigree sci-fi techie stuff, that was up to us to help him with. But that didn't mean that he wasn't guiding the ship in terms of what components were needed and how big they ought to be and everything else.
Specifically, it's a ship of exploration that's got a lot of equipment. What Arthur and Ridley said was that, that this thing lands and it opens up and it becomes like a mobile
VTOL vectoring engines, and the feeling of a creature kind of sitting on the landscape with these four big legs. Those desires were so clearly strong with Ridley and Arthur both, that I knew that whatever I adapted from Steve's had to incorporate that. And Steve, frankly, one of Steve's models was extremely close to that concept. And then it was just a detailing pass. It was just figuring out what's the surface breakup and detailing that will give this thing the scale that it needs, because it's huge. And it has a fairly aeronautic shape that makes it look like an atmospheric flying vehicle. I mean, the Nostromo was like a box. It was chunky and it looked like it could land on a planet, but it was not meant to fly around on a planet. Whereas this one really could do long distance sorties on a planet in its atmosphere. But at the same time, it wanted to feel a bit like Alien 1, at least in my mind. That's what I wanted it to feel like. And it wanted to have a sense of scale that traditionally they got by, kit bashing tons of little tank parts and battleship parts and all kinds of stuff onto miniature models. And so I took it upon myself to kind of really study pictures of the Nostromo, and I would literally kit bash in Photoshop whole chunks of the Nostromo skin and lay that onto my illustrations to get that exact kind of pipe conduits running on the surface and all that kind of stuff. The landing foot is made up of a piece of a Terex mining bulldozer's shovel bit and pieces of World War II German sort of train tanks and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, I literally used the old methods.
We tried to do graphics with steroids on this one, very bold, on an enormous scale, including the exterior of the Prometheus, which is kind of based on the graphics from various fighter aircraft, bombers from World War II.
So I did a huge number of color schemes, ended up doing some stuff that was maybe stronger than I initially was comfortable with in terms of yellow stripes and things that were influenced by beautiful Messerschmitts and different fighters from World War II. But I have to say that the use of the yellow and the use of it with white and black graphically, it's worked really well. And what's neat is that it does relate back to some of the early concept work of Chris Foss and Ron Cobb as well from Alien 1. And then I worked on almost all of the human interior sets, whether it be the Wayland Vickers suite, which is up in the lifeboat that lives on top of the ship, or the medical bay, or the mess hall, or the cryo sleep systems, the bridge of the ship, which had this cool idea that really kind of brought back from Alien 1 of the extruding platform, which was very much like Ash's station on the Nostromo, but now we're using it, in the bridge.
The bridge is one area where we actually looked at the design work that was done for the original film. Now, the Nostromo, as we saw when we saw the film screened, I began to appreciate the claustrophobia and how jammed up the spaces were. In fact, Ridley mentioned how difficult it was to film in, but how rich it was because it was so tight and enclosed. At the same time, he wanted a sense of scale on this version. So we had to be large, but very intimate.
The bridge design of Prometheus is actually kind of a Ron Cobb bridge design from Alien 1 that got split into two things. It got split into the bridge and then into Ash's pod, but originally it was sketched as one, and we actually kind of returned it in some way to that Ron Cobb form.
You've got the desk, the cockpit, the main desk for Yannick, pilot, and his co-pilots, and the feed corridors up to that. And it's always limited. You'd be amazed how you have to eke out your budget, because sets like of that quality are very costly. It's really knowing exactly what you want. And if you know exactly what you want, you're going to kind of maintain budget. If you don't know what you want and say, I might need it, that's where it goes up.
We wanted a window. So we decided to introduce a gigantic wraparound windscreen, multifaceted, kind of in the tradition of a stealth bomber technology, very jewel-like and faceted. Wrapping under the skull of the insect carapace and tucked under the chin, as it were, so that you could then also include a gangplank viewing platform for the captain and stand out and be able to look down on the planet's surface below you as you cruised on over.
We definitely gave thought to how the different components of the interiors fit into the ship in general, but a huge amount of what you're worried about when you're building sets is how it fits into the stages that you have to build them in, and what's the height and what's the visual effects needs of how far away green screens are. So, the bridge is a good example of something that where the set itself has a lot of height, and then it has to be mounted up a certain distance to get certain angles down below the glass looking up at the people, and then it's got, it needs the giant clearance of green screen lighting all around it, and, at least at 270.
And that all had to be put on engineering bellows, which are big rubber gasketed vibration pads, so that we could do turbulent vibration as we came into the atmosphere and rock the whole ship. And then that implied various elements of design, i.e. is the roof attached to the walls, are the corridors attached to the main space? And we decided not to do that, to detach everything from each other, so everything was a bit free to jostle and jangle. But we didn't know how that would really behave. I thought it might start oscillating beyond control and smash itself to bits. Fortunately, that didn't occur. Then there was design of the vehicles to explore the pad, because in the end, this is an archaeological scientific expedition. So the vehicles had to be able to cope with every kind of inhospitable environment that you can imagine. And how do we actually make a functioning vehicle, and not only one vehicle, but 6.
It was very interesting to take a different take that was done on other movies, which is not something military. The goal here, when we worked on the rover and other vehicles, was to have a kind of a design that reflects something more like a National Geographic, a team of explorers, and not at all something military. It was more a take that was about explorers, and something that had like a high money in order to build those vehicles, and something that's very technically sharp.
And we ended up building 3 large rovers and some ATVs, which were all practical and would be used on locations. We wanted them to go, 50 miles an hour with a dozen people on board.
So all that had to be designed, and the interior of those buses. The buses are driven by electronics, so there's all the screens. There's 1 million screens in every feasible space on that ship and outside each of these vehicles.
So we went to the military, of course, because they have the best toys. And then we got several different chassis and did concept designs on each of them in sketch form to present to Ridley. And this went on for about a month. We got a load of notions that basically went from vehicles that had passengers sitting on the outside, others that hovered and flew. So there was a very free-ranging design phase that embraced all kinds of, we didn't want to put any limits on Ridley, saying, this is possible. And he picked on a few basic ideas and gave us some of his famous Ridley Graham sketches to discuss what the shape language was. And we developed from there. We ended up on a Czechoslovakian surplus chassis, a vehicle called a Tatra 8x8, which is an all-terrain, all-wheel steering, broken axle, high-speed military transport vehicle and designed our body shell on that, based on an armored personnel carrier. Not that there was going to be any battle scenes, but the thinking was that these scientists and explorers of unknown planets would be prepared to encounter anything. We got 3 of them over from Czechoslovakia, stripped them all down of their old truck bodies, and then we blasted out in a great hurry because of the constraints of time. I think it took us 11 weeks to build from scratch once we got the chassis. Most car companies take about a year or 2 to develop a design and then about a year to actually come up with a single prototype vehicle. So that gives you a sense of how accelerated film process is. A body shell that had a lot of input from Ridley about the nuance of the proportions of windows and angles, so it had a very aggressive character with great visibility. And accessorized using all LED lighting. We wanted to be state-of-the-art for film lighting, so all the lighting was custom designed and installed. Every element of the vehicle is made from scratch, including the body shell, interior paneling, seating, and all applied to the basic Tatra chassis.
Like, it's not really about that. It's about this kind of religious pursuit of the main character and her quest for answers.
There was a lot of craftsmen, a lot of artists, a lot of technicians, art directors, set designers, draftspersons who worked with me. And without the craft skills that they brought and the devotion to the work that they brought, it wouldn't be the movie that it is.
Ridley, because he created this universe, is much less precious about it than anybody else on the planet. You know, all of us see it as something that's written in stone and that has gone on to this incredible life as a franchise and a series and comic books and all this kind of stuff. To Ridley, it's I think he's aware of all those things, but fundamentally it's still just a job he did in the 1970s. It's something that he came up with, and if that's what it is, then he can change it.